The letter arrived on a Thursday. Margaret Holloway, 67 years old, a retired Collier County schoolteacher who had spent 22 years in the same capecoral condo, opened an envelope from her homeowners association and found a number that made no sense to her: $48,000 due within 90 days. She read it 3 times. She checked the name on the envelope to be sure it was hers. Then she sat down at her kitchen table, the same table she had graded papers on for 2 decades, and tried to understand how a building she had paid off years ago could suddenly cost her almost $50,000 she did not have. She had done everything right. She had bought modestly. She had paid off the mortgage. She had saved what a teacher's salary allowed her to save. And none of it was going to be enough because the rules of staying in her own home had been rewritten while she was not looking. This wasn't a fine. It wasn't a mistake. It was a special assessment triggered by Florida's Senate Bill 4D, passed in 2022 in the aftermath of the Surfside Champlain Towers collapse. The law is real, the need behind it is real, and the requirement is straightforward. Florida's 1.5 million condo units, the largest inventory of any state in the country, must now fund full structural reserves. No more association votes to waive them, no more kicking the can down the road for another year. The buildings must be made safe, and the owners must pay for it. On its surface, that is a reasonable response to a tragedy that killed almost 100 people. Nobody serious argues that aging concrete towers should be allowed to crumble unchecked. The buildings do need the work. The question was never whether the repairs should happen. The question, the one this entire story turns on, is how fast the bill arrives and who is standing nearby when it does. But here's what that letter sitting on Margaret's kitchen table doesn't explain. Where does that $48,000 actually go once she pays it? And who benefits when owners like Margaret, surviving on $2,100 a month in Social Security and a small teacher's pension, simply cannot pay at all? And perhaps most importantly, why did this law move through the legislature in under 90 days with almost no organized opposition on a compliance timeline that gave fixed income owners almost no room to survive it? 3 questions. A law that passed too fast, money that goes somewhere specific, and a group of people who benefit when the most vulnerable owners are forced out. Those 3 questions are going to pull us through everything that follows, and by the end, they connect into a single picture. Pull back from Cape Coral for a moment and look at the whole state, because Margaret is not an isolated case. She is one data point on a line. And the data doesn't suggest a trend, it draws a straight line. Miami-Dade County condo median prices are up 61% since 2020, according to Redfin's 2024 tracking. In Pinellas County, 3,200 condo units are currently listed for sale carrying active special assessments that exceed $25,000 each, meaning the buyer inherits the bill. In Sarasota, the median household income sits at $58,000 a year, while the median carrying cost for a condo, once you combine the mortgage, the HOA fees, the insurance, and the assessment, now averages $4,100 per month. Run that math. A household earning the local median cannot afford the local median condo. That isn't a market that is simply expensive. That is a market that has stopped working for the people who live in it, and it isn't supposed to work for them. That is the part most people miss. The market did not break by accident. It was allowed to break, and the breaking has a beneficiary. So the real question is not why prices are rising. The real question is who is actually buying what gets released when owners are pushed out. 10 towns tell the complete story here, and we are going to walk through all of them. Cape Coral, Naples, Sarasota, St. Petersburg, Clearwater, Fort Lauderdale, Boca Raton, Palm Beach, Daytona Beach, and the Villages. Each one represents a different stage of the same transformation. Some are early in the cycle, some are mid-cycle, some are nearly complete. And in 7 of these 10 towns, the fastest growing buyer demographic is not an individual owner-occupant looking for a place to live. It is institutional capital, or an LLC registered entity. That is not a coincidence scattered randomly across a map. That is a direction. Something is pointing the same way in town after town, To understand why, you have to start with insurance. Because Florida's property insurance crisis gets described as a weather story, and it isn't one. It is a policy story with a very specific outcome. 7 major insurers have exited the Florida market since 2022. Citizens Insurance, the state-backed insurer of last resort, the carrier that was never designed to be anyone's primary insurer, now holds 1.3 million policies. Back in 2019, it held 420,000. That is the backstop quietly becoming the main floor. The average Florida homeowner now pays roughly $6,000 a year for property insurance, set against a national average of $1,700, according to the Insurance Information Institute's 2024 data. Florida homeowners are paying more than 3 times what the typical American pays, and the gap is still widening with every renewal cycle. For a working family, that gap is painful. For a retiree on a fixed pension, it is structural. There is no raise coming to absorb it, no promotion, no second income. The number simply grows past what the household can carry, and then a decision gets made for them. The granular numbers are where it stops being abstract and starts being visceral. Clearwater Beach homeowners watched their average premiums climb from $3,200 to $9,800 in the span of just 2 years between 2021 and 2023. Imagine budgeting your retirement around one number and then watching it triple while your income does not move at all. Fort Lauderdale's flood zone reclassification in 2023 triggered FEMA National Flood Insurance Program, increases averaging $4,400 per year for Zone AE properties, and many of those properties are owned by retirees on fixed incomes who had no idea the reclassification was even being considered until the bill landed. They did nothing wrong. They did not build in a new place. The map was redrawn underneath them, and the new map came with a new price they never agreed to. Here's the mechanism almost nobody says out loud. When insurance becomes unaffordable, owners are forced to sell. When owners sell under financial distress, prices compress, at least briefly, because a distressed seller cannot wait for the perfect buyer. That brief compression creates an acquisition window, a moment when a property can be bought below what it would otherwise command. The industry even has a clean, bloodless term for this. They call it a distressed asset cycle. And private equity firms are not waiting passively for these windows to randomly appear. They are actively tracking Citizens Insurance non-renewal data and using it as a deal sourcing signal, a way to find exactly which neighborhoods are about to produce forced sellers. This is documented. It is entirely legal, and it is happening right now while you are watching this. The owner who lists in a panic never sees the firm on the other side of the transaction. They see a buyer. They do not see that the buyer found them through a data feed built specifically to locate people exactly like them at the exact moment they were weakest. Now return to the law itself, because the timeline is where the story pivots. Senate Bill 4D passed in May 2022, just 3 weeks after the 1-year anniversary of the Surfside collapse. 98 people died when Champlain Towers South came down in the middle of the night, and the state's response was, on its face, responsible and overdue. Florida had 912 condo buildings over 30 years old carrying 0 structural reserves. Buildings with no safety net at all. Something genuinely had to change, and pretending otherwise would be dishonest. But examine the implementation timeline closely, because this is the hinge the entire story turns on. Full compliance was required by December 31st, 2024. Picture a 100-unit building that needs $5 million in structural reserves. Under the law's timeline, that is $50,000 per unit in under 30 months. Now spread that exact same $5 million across a normal 30-year financing horizon instead, and the cost falls to roughly $139 per unit per month. The work is identical. The safety outcome is identical. The only thing that changed is the speed of the demand. The compression from 30 years down to 30 months is the single variable that changes everything for someone like Margaret. According to survey data from the Florida Condo Owners Association, 67% of affected owners over the age of 65 say they cannot fund the assessment without selling their unit. 2 out of every 3 older owners, not inconvenienced, not asked to tighten their budget, forced out of homes they already owned outright. If you have followed the thread this far, you are already paying closer attention to how Florida actually works than most people who only read the headlines. And that tells you something about who you are. Whether you already own a home or a condo in Florida, or you are seriously planning to move here, the rest of this breakdown is the part you need to hear, because what comes next is where the 3 questions from the beginning finally connect. And it is the part that decides whether you see the next move coming or get caught by it. Cross-reference that 67% figure with the deed records and the picture sharpens. In Sarasota County alone, 2,100 condo units transferred from individual ownership to LLC ownership in 2023. In 2020, that same number was 340. That is not a gradual drift. That is a 6-fold jump in 3 years. And this brings us straight back to the third open question from the start. Who lobbied against a longer phase-in timeline? Who specifically wanted the window to be short? The Florida Association of Realtors and the Florida Apartment Association both submitted formal testimony opposing the proposed 5-year and 10-year phase-in amendments. Read that slowly. The shorter the compliance window, the more owners are forced to sell quickly. The more owners are forced to sell quickly, the more inventory flows to the buyers who have capital ready and waiting. The testimony is public, sitting in the legislative record where anyone can read it. Follow the testimony, and it points exactly where the deed records already told you it would. Now the 10 towns rapid fire, because the cumulative weight of them matters more than any single number. Naples. The median home price is now $1.1 million, up 89% since 2019, and the teachers, nurses, and service workers who keep the city physically functioning now average a 54-mile commute from wherever they can still afford to live. St. Petersburg, 14 luxury towers approved or under construction in the Edge District since 2021, and the number of affordable units required under the current zoning variance rules is 0. Daytona Beach, a foreclosure rate running 3.1 times the national average in 2024, according to ATTOM data, with institutional buyers purchasing 38% of those foreclosed properties at auction. Clearwater and Fort Lauderdale we have already seen through their insurance numbers. Bocaraton, 61% of single-family home purchases in the first quarter of 2024 were all cash transactions, according to the Miami Association of Realtors, and cash buyers at that price point are almost never individuals buying a home simply to live in it. Palm Beach completes the pattern. Average property tax bills for non-homesteaded properties there are up 210% since 2020. On paper, that policy targets seasonal homes and investment properties, which sounds reasonable. But it also catches retirees who relocated to Florida after the pandemic and missed the homestead exemption filing window by a matter of weeks, often without ever knowing the window existed. And the Villages sits at the far end of the cycle, the model of the fully managed, fully converted community that the other 9 towns are being reshaped toward. In every one of these 10 places, the same signal repeats. The middle of the market is being surgically removed, not slowly eroded by chance, removed deliberately by a stack of pressures, all pushing the same direction. Before we close the loop on Margaret, here is something genuinely worth having if you own property in Florida or you are weighing a move here. Every town worth buying into and every town worth steering clear of in this state is now collected in one place. It is a complete breakdown of 40 Florida towns, 20 of them rated as towns to buy and 20 rated as towns to avoid, assembled into a single guide called the Florida Buy and Avoid List for 2026. You can get it through the link in the description below. But stay right here, because the answer to that very first question, where Margaret's $48,000 actually goes, is the part of this story almost nobody is talking about, and it is about to land. Margaret Holloway has 3 options and only 3. She can pay the $48,000, which is simply impossible on her income. She can take out a personal loan, and the one lender who would even consider her application quoted her 14.2% APR, a rate that would quietly eat her alive. Or she can sell. She is selling. The unit she bought for $87,000 in 2002 is now assessed at $340,000. After the realtor commission, after the assessment payoff that her buyer will negotiate directly into the contract, and after closing fees, she will net approximately $201,000. On paper, that sounds like a win. 22 years of Florida real estate appreciation finally cashed out. But here is the number that reframes the entire thing. The median one-bedroom rental in Cape Coral now runs $1,890 per month. That is 90% of her entire monthly income. She cannot rent in the city she taught school in for 2 decades. She cannot stay. She will most likely leave Florida entirely, and she will not be the last person on her hallway to do so. One by one, the doors on her floor are quietly changing hands. And now, the answer to the first open loop. Where does Margaret's $48,000 actually go? It goes to the contractor hired to perform the structural work that SB 4D mandates. And in Margaret's building, that contractor is a subsidiary of the very same LLC that submitted a bulk buyout offer to her condo association 6 months earlier. Sit with that for a second. The assessment funds the repairs. The repairs satisfy the legal requirement, and the LLC, having already positioned itself as the eventual buyer, then acquires the now stabilized, now safe, now repaired building at a price that was compressed by the exact financial distress the assessment itself created. The money does not disappear into a void, it travels in a circle. It leaves the owners and arrives eventually as a discount for the buyer who is always standing at the exit. Margaret paid to make the building safe. Someone else will own the safe building. That is not a glitch in the system. For the buyer, that is the system working exactly as designed. So let's be precise about what is actually happening, because the word conspiracy is the wrong word, and it lets the real story off the hook. Florida is not becoming a playground for the wealthy because of hurricanes or climate risk or the impersonal randomness of market forces. It is being deliberately converted through 3 coordinated pressure systems operating at the same time. Insurance non-renewals that manufacture distressed sellers. Condo reserve laws with implementation timelines too compressed for fixed income owners to survive. And institutional capital staged patiently at every single exit point to absorb whatever gets released. This is not a secret cabal in a back room. It is a market strategy. It is legal, it is documented in public records, and it is fully replicable in any other state that decides to follow Florida's regulatory path. That is what should concern you wherever you live. Here's the final number, the one that ties the whole picture together. Florida added 365,000 new residents in 2023. The median income of those new arrivals is $112,000 a year, nearly double the $61,000 median income of the Florida residents who are already here, according to U.S. Census data. The state is not simply growing, it is being quietly replaced, one distressed sale at a time, one Margaret at a time. The population number goes up and the headlines call it a boom. But underneath that number, a slower and far more permanent exchange is taking place. So here is what I want to hear from you. If you own property in Florida, have you checked your condo association's reserve fund balance? And tell me in the comments what you found, because that single line in the budget may matter more to your future than your home's market value. Tell me which Florida town you live in, or which one you are planning to move to, and tell me what you want us to break down next, because the patterns you describe in the comments are exactly what shape the next video. And if you're the kind of person who believes the real story of this market is the one the national headlines keep skipping past, hit the subscribe button right now, because next we are tracing exactly which Florida towns are seeing institutional buyers move in the fastest, and what that means for the owners who are still holding on. Margaret learned all of this on a Thursday in an envelope for $48,000. The rest of us still have a little time left to see it coming. We will see you in the next one.